Dear diary, today I saw a bird. It had feathers, and it was beautiful and quite tasty. The bloody panda's at work.
Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Freyr Ullr, and today I'm going to talk about if there is any link between the gods Cernunnos, Freyr and Ullr. The two last ones, as you know it, are pre-Christian Scandinavian deities. So, this was a question posed by one of my patrons, not the first time, as this has been asked by other patrons of mine and a lot of other people in here on YouTube and other social media where I am at. Apparently this is somewhat a common doubt, so I'll try to go straight to the point. It would seem that in many pagan circles, Neo-Pagan circles, especially online communities, the god Cernunnos from Celtic myths is quite the famous deity among New Age pagans. But it would seem he has been often associated with other deities from other European pagan pantheons. And the connections made are often with Freyr, the Old Norse god, probably due to the connection with fertility, and because Freyr as well as Cernunnos are both depicted with an erect phallus. Although this depiction in Cernunnos with a prominent erect phallus is rarely found. Let me rephrase that so you can have a better understanding of this, and it's important to have that in mind to try to understand this seemingly connection. It's not actually easy to find a representation of Cernunnos in the past. In the actual representations of this deity, there are some specific elements in the apparel or the garments and in other elements revolving around the deity that may indicate a clear representation of Cernunnos. What might indicate the representation of this deity, for instance, are antlers in this deity, possessing antlers, and not horns but antlers. And this is very important because Cernunnos is indeed more usually associated with antlers, having antlers, specifically of the red deer. There are deities with horns that people immediately associate with Cernunnos, like Pan, the Greek Pan, and people often also make a connection between Pan and Cernunnos because of the horns, but horns and antlers, the difference between the two is profound, as antlers are shed seasonally, whereas horns are not. This is clearly a difference which is significant for those who would worship Cernunnos in the past, as he is a deity related to the change of the season as well. And we have indications of figurines and statues that have holes as though to fit removable antlers from representations of Cernunnos, and separate antlers have been found in other contexts. And this indicates that the seasonal nature of Cernunnos was sufficiently important for some devotees to have the means to alter the images to reflect that precisely, to put on and remove antlers. Now, another element typically of a representation of Cernunnos are torques, as a piece of jewelry as you know it. Although deities with torques are often pictured on the necks of various Celtic deities, so it could be any Celtic deity really, or not even deities but guardian spirits or warrior ancestors, protective spirits, as we often find at the entrances of Celtic Iberian settlements. But of course there are also other elements such as a purse or a cornucopia, three heads or faces, the ram-headed snake, animals in general, specifically and especially stags, or the deity in question, seated, usually cross-legged. So the more of these elements an image has, the more likely it is to be a representation of Cernunnos. And notice that I haven't referred to actual erect phallus. The modern tendency to depict Cernunnos with a prominent erect phallus is not reflected in any ancient artifacts concerning this deity. Not one single Gallo-Roman sculpture of Cernunnos have this element. Certainly, we have other Gallo-Roman iconographic figures with an erect phallus, but that was depicted for other deities, not for Cernunnos specifically. And despite this historical fact, Cernunnos with an erect phallus became quite the popular conception and extremely widespread in the online world. So this might be one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why people make an association between Cernunnos and with Freyr, the Norse god. Because images of Freyr, indeed, historically speaking and archaeologically speaking, obviously, they appear with an erect phallus. But Cernunnos with an erect phallus is a modern invention. This idea of Cernunnos having a prominent erect phallus probably came from Cairnhabas. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. There's a place in England called Cairnhabas where there is a carved hill figure believed to be of Cernunnos precisely. This figure carries a club and features an erect phallus. Although the Romans in ancient Britannia associated this specific deity, when they came in contact with it, this specific deity with a club, to their own god Mercury, the messenger god. Or maybe the idea of Cernunnos having an erect phallus comes from the representations of other Celtic and Gallo-Roman gods with an erect phallus, but they weren't actually Cernunnos, but clearly related to fertility due to this element. And because Cernunnos is associated with animals and the forests and the changing of the seasons, there is a certain idea in here of fertility. So people just decided to represent him without pants and with an erect phallus. Because why not? Let's just make stuff up. No one cares. But to make a clear link with fertility. Anyway, this is probably the main reason why Cernunnos is associated with the Norse god Freyr, due to the erect phallus. The Norse god was represented with an erect phallus indeed, whilst Cernunnos was not, right? Now, sometimes a connection is forcibly pushed between Cernunnos and the Norse god Ullr, or Uller, most likely because of the belief that Ullr is a god of the hunt, and therefore all of a sudden it is as if all the gods of the hunt are forcibly associated with the forest as well, remoting to a notion related to a more classical Mediterranean pagan religious background. We have the goddess Diana, a Roman goddess, Artemis and Orion, both Greek, all these three deities of the hunt and the forest. So yes, indeed, people like to make a lot of links between cultures. Some links are definitely there and others not so much. Now, the Wiccanization of heathenry or Wiccanization of Germanic pagan beliefs, one of the examples is Ullr, for instance, a Neo-Pagan religion very much influenced by Wicca. And this Neo-Pagan religion made a lot of connections between Celtic and Norse religious conceptions and connections that were never there to begin with. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't connections between the two cultural realities. There are loads of connections, perhaps not loads, but a few prominent connections between these two realities. But Cernunnos with Freyr and or with Ullr just isn't real. There's little we know about Ullr for certain. I've been researching on Ullr for 3 years to make a video about him, but there is little we can really say about this deity. And obviously nothing connects him to Celtic mythology and religion, let alone to Cernunnos. Ullr is a very old pre-Christian Scandinavian god, certainly older than the cult of Odin in the north. Now, place names derived from Ullr often appear right next to place names derived from Vanir gods. In Scandinavia, there are more place names derived from Vanir gods than any other gods combined. And place names derived from Ullr often appear next to place names derived from Freyr, Freya, Njordr and also Skadi. So there seems to be a certain connection here with fertility aspects. It must also be pointed out that Ullr seems to have been a deity exclusively from the Scandinavian peninsula, if we can call it that, as there are no place names derived from Ullr in Denmark, for instance, and his cult didn't seem to have spread outside Scandinavia, into Iceland or Greenland, for instance. There are at least 35 place names derived from Ullr in Norway and 48 in Sweden, which is a lot, believe me. And with this being said, there's no connection between Ullr and Cernunnos, or any other deity for that matter. Also, place names derived from Ullr aren't evenly distributed across Scandinavian territory, but rather concentrated in certain regions. So this cult was more restricted to certain territories, unlike place names derived from Freyr, Odin and Thor, which are found all over the place and more evenly distributed in Scandinavia. Now, Freyr, on the other hand, is the god of the Swedes and god of fertility and sexuality and wealth, and the personification of the life-giving powers of nature related to agrarian cults. Nothing to do with a deity of the wilds and the forests. Freyr belongs to the gods of peace and plenty, whilst Cernunnos is the god of the wilds and the woodland realm. Cernunnos is connected with male animals, and this has led to the belief that he is associated with fertility and the vegetation. Cernunnos is a totally Western Celtic deity of sacred forests, probably in association with Nemetheus, the god of sacred forests and sacred groves, derived from Nemeton, which means groves, in which ancient druids of the British Isles, Gaul and Lusitania met in these sacred woodlands. The Roman poet Lucan described such groves as places where no animal would venture and where gales and lightning had no effect and strange sounds emerged from the ground and oaks burst into flames without casting harm. Lucan might have been exaggerating quite a bit and romanticizing this, as we take it from other writings of his. He was fond of gossip, so he liked stories. Now, Nemetheus comes from the Celtic root Nemeton, as I have said, which means sacred grove, and also the word used for sanctuary, indicating a holy place or a sacred place. And here we also find connections with Germanic paganism and the sacred groves to gods of fertility such as Nerthos, who would be known in Scandinavia as Njordr. And also a connection here with the old German sacred groves where the horses of the deity were kept, and from the observance of their behavior, the observance of the behavior of horses, divination was made, which also makes a connection with the horse cult of Freyr, likewise used for divination purposes, with the use of a wagon. But horses for divination purposes, horse augury, and kept in sacred places are linked to a variety of deities, including Slavic ones such as Sventevit and Triglav. Cernunnos is also associated with fertility, lust, and sexuality, and if he is to be associated with any deity due to those aspects alone, that would be Pan, the Greek satyr, a hybrid deity such as Cernunnos, and both possess horns. Although, remember what I've said earlier about the difference between horns and antlers, so it's not likely a connection between Cernunnos and the Greek Pan, precisely due to that, as Cernunnos specifically has antlers, which is a key element to understand his connection as a god of the hunting season and connection with the male stag. Anyway, this might come as a bit of a shock, especially for Wiccans, but there are no evidences that Cernunnos was highly worshipped in the past. He is a Celtic god, there is no doubt about that, and there were certain cults to this deity, but not a high worship per se, or rather, he was not a major or prominent deity of a main pantheon and venerated throughout the Celtic cultural world, as some Celtic gods were. Cernunnos became quite famous with the emergence of the contemporary Neo-Pagan religious manifestation called Wicca. In some traditions within Wicca, the cycle of seasons follows the relationship between the horned god, sometimes expressed as Cernunnos, and with the nameless goddess. However, this relationship is a relatively new Neo-Pagan concept, and there is no scholarly or archaeological evidence to indicate that ancient peoples might have celebrated this specific marriage of the horned god and a mother goddess, unlike we have in the case of Freyr, who has a clear relationship with Freyr and Ullr, and Ullr with Skadi. The little we know about Ullr is often connected with Skadi, mostly in place names after Ullr or Ullr, which are almost always located near place names derived from Skadi. Speaking of Cernunnos, I must obviously speak about Herne, the god of the wild hunt. Now, this god of the wild hunt might be the main source of inspiration that led Wiccans to insert in Cernunnos the title of God of the Hunt and or God of the Wild Hunt. Herne has his origins in a local folktale from Berkshire region of England, although there is virtually no information available to us via primary sources about who exactly this figure was and how important it was in an actual pagan past. So have that in mind. According to folklore, Herne was a huntsman employed by King Richard II, so we are talking about the second half of the 14th century. In one version of the story, other men became jealous of his status and accused him of poaching on the king's land. Falsely charged with treason, Herne became an outcast among his former friends. Finally, in despair, he hanged himself from an oak tree, which later became known as Herne's Oak. This is interesting because both in Celtic and Germanic religious panoramas, sacred groves are almost always where oaks grow. Not always, but there are many references to this. So we are getting somewhere. Now, in another variation of the legend of this folktale, Herne was fatally wounded while saving King Richard from a charging stag. He was miraculously cured by a magician who tied the antlers of the dead stag to Herne's head. As payment for bringing him back to life, the magician claimed Herne's skill in forestry. Doomed to live without his beloved hunt, Herne fled to the forest and hanged himself, again from the oak tree. However, every night he rides once more leading a spectral hunt, the wild hunt, chasing the game in Windsor Forest specifically. So in this folktale we have here a connection with the hunt, antlers and the stag and the forest, all religious symbols associated with Cernunnos. We are getting closer. Or are we? The truth is, Herne is a local phenomenon, a god of a specific locality, surviving in the local folklore. However, Herne might indeed be a manifestation of Cernunnos, the Celtic horned god. The likely scenario we have here is that Herne is the Berkshire interpretation of Cernunnos, some Celtic vestiges of the worship of Cernunnos in the area, interpreted in a different way and given another name over the centuries by these people, surviving in the folklore of Berkshire. The Windsor Forest area has a heavy Saxon influence, however, so Herne could be a Saxon interpretation of Cernunnos or a Saxon interpretation of another horned local deity of the hunt. Right, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag.